All right. It's good to see you, Judd, Paul, Oliver, and hopefully our other friends got the message that we are doing 8:15. We're also going to do Gemara 8:15 next week in Mirza Hashem. And then the following week, stay tuned because we're going to go away Thursday through Sunday. So we may just do Gemara, earlier in the week, maybe Monday night. So just stay tuned. But next week also 8:15. So we find ourselves on the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, and we are continuing to talk about miscellaneous disqualifications of an esrog that are listed in the Mishnah, and we are just making our way through them. So all the way actually, we already did the I think we already did the first. Did we? Yeah, we'll just do it anyway. Why not? Nistak Nikev. So in the Mishnah, it said that an esrog that is split or is punctured is pasul. Now, what kind of puncture would pasul the esrog? Tani ula bar chanina nikiv negav mafulash b'mashahu. If it goes mafulash from one side to the other straight through, then even the smallest hole will be problematic. But if it doesn't go from side to side, then it's about the width, isar, the diameter of the coin that is an isar. That would be enough to disqualify the esrog. And while I don't have my Nitzotze Hashas Sefer handy with me, I'm willing, assuming it's mutter to gamble, that's a separate sugya, but I'd be willing to wager that there's some Hasidic Torah, I'm pretty sure, talking about the idea that even the smallest hole, but if it goes through and through, then there's some impression made over there. I'm pretty sure it exists. Okay, now going forward, Boy Rava asked the following question. Noldu be'esrog simani treifa mahu. Now, this is interesting. You didn't bargain for this when we chose Masechah Sukkah. That we're going to talk about treifos. We're going to be talking about animals that are, well, we call it treif. Now, perhaps the most iconic way for an animal to become a treifa, and it's what we're required to check for, is in which organ? The lungs. The lungs. In fact, even though the majority of lungs we presume are okay and the animals are kosher, we are required to nonetheless go ahead and midrabanan check them for sirchos, for adhesions. Now, this is really funny. The Pnei Yeshua picks up on this and says, or why is the Gemara about to make comparisons to disqualifications of a cow to disqualifications of an esrog? You know, at the point of determining whether an animal is a treif or not is determined whether the animal is going to die, relatively speaking, imminently, even though imminent's a little bit too close, within the year. But esrog, the esrog, we're not, it's already detached from the tree. We're not trying to determine whether it's a live esrog or a dead esrog. So interesting, the Pnei Yeshua says some of these psulim for the cow are not necessarily due to it being a treifa, but might just be because there's something chaser, there's something missing from the cow. And in a similar way, an esrog needs to be shalem, it needs to be complete. If there's something missing, like for instance, we talked about punctures in the esrog, that would invalidate it. Okay? So again, for those joining us, we're on 36a, Lamed Vav Amud Aleph at the top. So again, Ba'i Rava, Noldu be'esrog simani treifa mahu. If an esrog begins to show signs of being a treifa, what is its status? Now, we have to ask a clarification question to understand what Rava's inquiry actually is, because I don't quite know what he means by simani treifa. So the Gemara doesn't know either. The Gemara asks, "My kami vayale." What is his question? E niklaf, if he means, one of the disqualifications of an animal to make it a treif is if its skin is torn off. Well, Tanina, we already dealt with niklaf in the Mishnah. Inistak, it's talking about a split in it. Tanina, we also discussed in the Mishnah. Inikav, if the issue is there's a puncture akin to a puncture in the lung. Tanina, we also taught that. So kikami vaile ula amar Rabbi Yochanan reya shenishbacha kekiton kshera. That his opinion of Ula, the neighbor of Yochanan, is that a lung, which basically liquid, it's like melting almost on the inside and it's liquefied on the there's a lot of liquid on the inside, it will still be a kosher animal. Rava qualifies. This is from a Rava who dekaima symphonaha. As long as it sounds like symphony, right? Symphonaha is still there. What's symphonaha? Do you have pictures in your art scroll? I can get the Mesivta Gemara to show you a picture if you want. Would that be helpful? What's it? I'm curious. It's kind of like it's the main tube. Someone help me with the proper terminology here, but it's kind of like the main tube inside the lung, right? So as we might know, the lung kind of like roots of a tree branches out, but there's like a central tube in the lung. So basically, okay, we could probably. Was it Paul?
Steinsides calls it the bronchia.
What?
Bronchia.
Like bronchitis. Ah, there you go. Okay. So it's as long as the central structure is intact, it is still okay. It's still not a treifa. Hello, kaimi symphona treifa. But if it's not intact, then these lungs are going down. So okay, we don't need a picture. I think we get the idea, right? There's a central tube in the lungs. Hachamai. So but here what's the halacha? So Dilma Hasam Hudalo Shaliba Avira Hadarbari. Now, one could say, maybe in the case of the potential treifa, as long as the lung remains intact enough, the animal can recover. The animal will heal. Whereas the esrog, once the inside of the esrog begins to kind of melt down and liquefy, that's the beginning. That's a harbinger for the rotting process. It's only downhill from there. So maybe that would be the case for an esrog. Odilma lo shna, or maybe there is no distinction in this case. Maybe it follows the same rules as a treifa, and as long as the central kind of like the central sac in the esrog, I think where the seeds are in there, that's like the central area of the esrog is intact, then it is still a kosher esrog. Now, I don't know who's performing x-rays on their esrogim to determine this, but presumably there are ways to see that. Tashima. So that's our question. Okay, we now know Rava's question. Great. All that was to know the question. We don't have an answer yet. The question is, an esrog that gets liquefied on its inside, is it still a kosher esrog? So now we try to resolve the question. Tashima, esrog tapuach, saruach, kavush, shalak, kushi, lavan, manumar. Okay, let's translate them. So tapuach and saruach we will explain later, but kind of like if it gets wet and rotting. Kavush means that it is like pickled. It's pickled. Shaluk is like a heavy boiling in water. Kushi is a pretty much kind of like a dark or black esrog. Lavan is a white esrog. Manumar is like a leprous esrog, which we've dealt with already. So all these different kinds of aberrations of esrogim are puzzle. Esrog kakador puzzle, an esrog which is shaped like a ball, right? We know an esrog is not a circle, but if it is shaped like a circle, like a ball, then it is puzzle. The yesh omrim af hatyom esrog. Af hatyum. Tiyum is like if it's like 2 in 1. Like they're twins. It's like a Siamese esrog. Think of it that way. Or esrog haboser, and esrog haboser. So it's interesting. Tosfos kind of takes Rashi to task on this. Rashi makes it sound like it's just a very small esrog, but that doesn't quite make sense. Tosfos says, because the Mishnah already deals separately with the minimal size of an esrog. Rather, Tosfos kind of gets to the point that it's an unripe esrog. It's not fully ripened or sufficiently ripened. So in this case, Rabbi Akiva posel v'chachamim machshirin. Rabbi Akiva says those are pasul, and the Chachamim say they are kosher. Galo b'tefus, if you took the esrog and you kind of put it into some sort of cookie cutter mold so it would grow into whatever shape you wanted it to grow into. And now you want to shape it like an apple, you want to shape it like a banana. If it starts looking like a different fruit because you shaped it differently, that also is pasul. Now, the reason that we cited this entire laundry list of over here is because we want to take out the initial idea. Katani mihas tapuach seruach. We taught that an etzrog that's tapuach and seruach is puzzle. My lav tapuach mi b'chutz v'seruach mi b'fnim. So isn't tapuach on the outside and seruach is on the inside, right? So so it sounds like if things start liquefying and things start going awry on the inside of the esrog, it's game over for the esrog, which answers Rava's question about whether it is comparable to the parameters of a treifa. It sounds like once it starts liquefying, even if you didn't get to the core of the esrog yet, it is already a puzzle esrog. Nope, not necessarily. Both the terms tapuach and surach refer to issues on the outside of the esrog, the external part of the esrog. L'kacha. So one is talking about when it becomes moist without what do you call it, rotting, and and the other one is it can start rotting without necessarily the moisture as well. Is that how they render it, by the way? I didn't check that, but I assume that's the proper rendering. Looks right on your end. What do you got, Paul?
Yeah, but I have a question. Are these flaws in the etrog an issue after the first day?
So this is a great question, and this is a fundamental question that basically we have to ask when for almost every psul of esrog we have to ask this question. Certain psulim are that the esrog is incomplete, or the esrog, as we'll talk about momentarily in the Gemara, when it's not ripe enough yet, it doesn't have a shein pri. It's not even called a fruit yet because it's not a fully ripe. It's not ripened sufficiently. Then there's another classification, which I think you're alluding to, that's called a pre-eitz hadar. And an esrog needs to be hadar at very least on the first day, which means maybe it needs the pitom on the first day, but not on the second days. And that is partially contingent on that discussion about, why is a esrog puzzle when the pitom falls off? Is it because it's not beautiful anymore? Or is it because it's missing something? It's lacking in its, baseline status as an esrog. So I haven't looked at the Rishonim on this, but I would imagine you're asking the right question. That maybe if this is an issue in the hitter of the esrog, maybe it would just be limited to the first day. But if this is in fact a chesaron, it makes it like renders it a treifa, so to speak, then it would not be kosher the other dates as well. So I'm not sure offhand, but again, I'd be willing to wager that this is dealt with in the Rishonim. But I will not take your time and start flipping through the Kovetz Mefarshim on the spot to see what they say on it. But it's a good question. All right. Going forward. Esro Kushi Puzzle. So the Hagos Utsiyunim. I don't know if you see it in your Gemaras, at least in my Oz V'Hadar edition, has these textual emendations on the cycle, the Hagos Utsiyunim. I always saw it's Sionim. Well, I didn't always think it, but for a half second I thought it was Sionim. And I was like, oh, the Peirush of the Zionists on the Gemara. So no, that's not really what it is. In case you got excited as well. So esrog kushi puzzle. So we said that an esrog from kush is puzzle. So generally it's kind of like a dark blackened esrog. So that's what it says in our mission. An esrog kushi is puzzle. Vatanya kushi kosher, domla kushi puzzle. No, actually, if it comes from kush, then it is kosher. Only if it grows in our part of the world, our neck of the woods, and it looks too black and looks like a kushi esrog, then it's puzzle. But an actual esrog from kush would be kosher. So how do I reconcile the Mishnah, which says a kushi esrog is puzzle, with the Bryce that says a kushi esrog is kosher? Samar Abaye, two answers. When our Mishnah said that a kushi esrog is puzzle, it didn't mean an actual kushi esrog. It meant an esrog grown in Bavel that looks like or maybe Israel rather, that looks like a kushi esrog. It's become too dark. Alternatively, Rava Amar, lo kasha, halan v'halahu. There's a difference between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi explains, I'll read it for you, halan v'halahu. La'olam matsisun kushi nami pasel. No, our Mishnah actually means that a kushi esrog is pasel, not just domela kushi. Below kasha, here's how you have to read it. Masnisan lipnei Eretz Yisrael, shurachokim Eretz Kush in Regilan. Eretz Yisrael is very far from the land of Kush, and therefore kushi esrog is so aberrant to them that it is puzzle for them. But the brisa that we cited is Livnei Bavel, is talking about esrogim grown in Bavel. Shekrovin Lakush, which is closer to the land of Kush, Regila Behen, and they're used to seeing it. But Mikol Makom, Bigadol Khan, when they grow it in Bavel, not an actual kushi esrog, Udome Lakushi, Nimmahu Upasal. So that's when it would be puzzle. So it's interesting actually, because you would think that what makes an esrog kosher or puzzle, what qualifies or disqualifies an esrog, should be an objective standard. It's actually a really, like Paul, coming back to your question from before, first day, second days, you could have a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel to determine what is a kosher versus a puzzle esrog. And it's very interesting, it's not based on any objective characteristics of the esrog. It's just based on what the societies are used to seeing. And I would suspect this might be based on what is called hadar. And hadar, while it might not be based on, the individual subjectively, it would seem that entire societies could kind of come to a consensus almost on what is considered hadar for their societies. But it's just a fascinating idea that what's kosher in Bavel is not kosher in Eretz Yisrael, at least according to Rava, not according to Abaye. So I'd imagine there's a lot of implications there. Anyway, my friends, we're up to our final section for this evening. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Amar Davar Echad. Sorry, I skipped. I think I skipped. One line up. Esrog haboser. So the not sufficiently ripe esrog. What is its status? Rabbi Akiva posel v'chachamim machshir, and Rabbi Akiva says posel v'chachamim machshiret. So Amar Rabba, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Amar Davar Echad. Both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon agreed in principle on this matter. Rabbi Akiva had to Amr. Now, what do they agree on? They agree in two different applications, but they agree in the same principle that a not sufficiently ripe esrog is not considered a fruit yet. It has not crossed the threshold to be considered a fruit for halakhic purposes. For Rabbi Akiva, Had to Amran, as we just said, it's not kosher enough to be used for an esrog, for Priyat Hadar. Rabbi Shimon, Maihi, so where does Rabbi Shimon express this idea? The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon, Poter, it's esrog bekotnan. Rabbi Shimon, Rashi fills in a little bit of information for us, so we don't have to look up the source. An esrog is only chayiv in maisrus. You only have to take off a tithe for the esrog if it is crossed the threshold to be considered a pre, to be considered a fruit. Until that point, you would not need to take off meiser. It does not qualify for meiser yet. It's not required. And it would seem that both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon agree to the same principle, either in Hilchos Arba Minim or in Hilchos Maisris, that the same principle is that it needs to be sufficiently ripe to be considered a fruit, and then all of the ramifications that issue forth from there. However, Amarle Abaye, Dilma Lohi, maybe Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva are not quite on the same page, even though ostensibly one would think so. Maybe Rabbi Akiva has a high bar for what's called an esrog, only when it comes to the laws of the Arba Minim, because it needs to be a pre, not just a pre, but a pre-eitz hadar. Aval Hasam, but in the Hilchos Maisrus, Rabbanan spherely, maybe he would actually concede to the Rabbanan that an not sufficiently ripe esrog would still be chayiv in maisris. Inami, alternatively, we could say the opposite as well. It says you shall take off meiser from all tuasarecha. So that implies we learn from the pasuk that you only take meiser off things that people would normally harvest from their field. This fruit is not yet ready to be harvested from the field. But here in Hilchos Arba Minim and in other areas of halacha, he fundamentally would agree that it constitutes a fruit for halachic purposes. Just meiser is the exception to the rule. So v'sulo midi. So there's nothing that we can really write. He said, there's nothing we can make of this because it's possible that both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon are not expressing fundamental rules, but what they are poskening on are actually the exceptions to the rule. And with that, my friends, we will put our bookmarks at the top of Lamed Vav Amud Beis, top of 36b, and we will hopefully pick up with more disqualifications next time, also at 8:15, God willing. And in Mirza Hashem, we will also, if all goes as planned, we should hit our next Mishnah as well at Mirza Hashem. Any questions before we conclude, my friends? Paul?
For those who hold that it is too immature to be considered a fruit, what's the bracha for eating it?
Interesting, because usually you only make a bracha on something that's edible. So this is an interesting question, right? Because, right. I think that's an excellent question, Paul. You're thinking of all the good questions tonight. That would potentially be another nafkamina. You only make a bracha on something that's considered edible, right? If I decide to take a bite out of these papers right over here, even though something possessed me to take a bite out of it, and I functionally chew on it and swallow it the same way I eat food, there's no real bracha to make on it because it's not food. That's, by the way, the reason you don't make a bracha when you take medicine. Even though medicine you take via your mouth and your throat, even a chewable pill. Now, right, so because it's fundamental, I mean, this gets into a whole sugya about, what about a vitamin gummy? The vitamin gummy is fundamentally a candy, which just has vitamins in it. So where do you draw the line? But I think that would precisely be another nafkamina, which is, if the reason Rabbi Akiva is telling us that you can't use an unripe esrog, not sufficiently ripe esrog, or what was the art school phraseology for it they used, or was that your own, or what do they call it? But what did you call it before?
I'm looking for it.
Oh, it's okay, but as long as I'm accurately representing. But the idea is right. That's precisely the question. Is it not good enough because this esrog is actually not a fruit yet? It's not actually an esrog yet, or is it a fruit, but it's not sufficient enough to constitute a priet hadar, a beautiful fruit, which will require it to be fully ripened. So, yeah, if it's not yet a fruit, I think you're right. Another nafkamina would be whether you would make a bracha on chewing on and eating it if it's not fruit yet. Is it any different than taking a bite out of the dirt that it's growing from? So I think that's an excellent nafkamina. I think it's a good nafkamina.
I couldn't quite understand where they're talking about a premature fruit. In other words, it's not really ripe, or is it really not even remotely like a fruit?
Right. It's not clear to me. Right, because the issue is Rashi just says it's about the size, like what's he says, like small, like small as like a bean or something. I have to find the Rashi. So Rashi seems to draw a line that not just simply like how green it is versus how yellow it is, but Rashi's saying is it's so small it's not yet considered a fully formed fruit. So for Rashi, it's not even just simply about being ripe. Tosos seems to think it's not about size, but I think it's about ripeness. But it is not precisely clear to me where that line gets drawn. That I'm not quite sure about. I'm not sure where to draw the line.
to answer your prior question, Steinzal says unripe.
Unripe. Okay. See, I've learned to be. Maybe this is like my like I've been learning to be politically correct. You don't want to say that they're unripe. Just say not sufficiently ripe. It softens. It's a lashon nikia. It softens the blow. See, now I'm applying that not just in my sermons, but now to my Gemara shirim. Look at me go. All right. Thank you for the clarification. We gotta do fruit first language, right? Like person first language. All right. Shkayach everyone, and wishing you all a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care.